Gentle fingertips caress nature's emerald blades. Serenity found. Here is how I made a game about touching grass. Before I begin, I would like to tell the tale of how I ended up in this grassy quest in the first place. In my regular day job, I work as a software engineer at a tech startup, which means I have not been touching grass since the beginning of my career. While video games were always a huge part of my life, for some reason I never ventured down game development despite working in programming for quite some time. I've attempted to justify this to myself through several excuses in the past. 1. Games are not productive. Surely it would be much better for me to spend my time programming applications that people don't actually need to solve non-existent problems and charge them exorbitant amounts of money for. Business value, baby. 2. The skills are not cross-applicable. I can build my games in Go, Rust, or JavaScript, but I can't build my multi-region distributed to-do list app in GDScript. Recently, however, I ran into a channel called Pirate Software while scrolling through YouTube Shorts, and quickly realized that my excuses were not only invalid, but completely wrong. Thor showed me that there are tons of valuable things to learn from making games. The only reason I kept shying away from game development is because I did not make time for it. After spending 8 to 12 hours a day writing a bunch of code for my day job, I was afraid of spending even more time writing code making a bad game. In short, I was just being lazy. With this realization, I decided to challenge myself by making my first game with a time investment of roughly 1 week. Thor told me to go make games, so I did. Most of my favorite games are role-playing games like Octopath Traveler, Pokemon Emerald, and Nier Automata. However, I knew that there was no way in hell I was going to finish a game like that within a 1-week period. So I decided to go with something much simpler. Given that I was a complete noob at game development when starting this project, I wanted to choose a game style that did not have any physics involved. Don't get me wrong, physics are super important for 95% of the games out there, but I wanted to make sure that I could focus on getting comfortable with whatever game engine I chose so I didn't feel too overwhelmed. My head almost immediately started drifting towards Aim Labs, which is an aim trainer many of you may be familiar with if you play first-person shooter games like Valorant or Counter-Strike. I figured I could use the basic monkey brain, "Ooh, there's an object, so try to click on it" mechanic as a simple arcade-style first game. While I now had a game in mind, I needed to come up with a general theme for the game, as clicking on objects doesn't make for a very compelling game title. Given that I'm an engineer and anime enjoyer, I thought it would be funny to base the game around the idea of touching grass. If you don't know what touching grass means, then you're probably a normal, social human being. Touching grass is internet slang for spending time outdoors and engaging with the physical world. It is often used as a declarative insult against degenerates, but in this case, I figured it would serve as a more cute and funny way to frame the objective of clicking objects. With those ideas in mind, I headed straight to Excalibur and whipped up this magnificent piece of art. I'm not an artist, and to be honest, I don't think I needed to tell you that, but as whack as this Nobel Peace Prize winning masterpiece might look, it sums up the game quite well. I wanted a basic title screen that you would click into to start the game. From there, you would be faced with grass sprites to click on and earn points. On the top left, there would be a 30-second timer, and the objective would be to click on as many grass elements as possible while avoiding obstacles. To make these obstacles fit the theme of the game, I decided to choose sprites that are commonly associated with grass aversion behavior, such as pornography, video games, and anime. Clicking on these sprites would make you lose points, thereby introducing some more complexity and more meme potential to the game. Now that I had a general idea of how things should look, I actually started building the thing. The first thing I had to do was choose a game engine. If I started this project a few months ago, I would have very likely chosen Unity, as it is a very versatile engine that has been used in some of my favorite games like Hollow Knight and Death's Door. However, given their recent pricing controversy, I decided it would make sense to go with something open source and with less drama like Godot. Godot is a game engine that can be used for both 2D and 3D games, and is fundamentally organized around entities called nodes, which can be used to compose scenes. Almost everything in Godot is a form of node, with each having their own special properties and nuances. But I found this general abstraction to be super simple and a great choice as a first-timer's game engine. The scripting language used for node manipulation is called GDScript and is incredibly similar to Python, which I already had experience with from schoolwork. After choosing an engine, building a prototype of the game was surprisingly smooth. Working with scenes and nodes did take some getting used to, but after setting up the play screen, the workflow of creating nodes and adding scripts started to click, and the rest was smooth sailing. The game itself just required writing some code to spawn grass in a random position at the beginning of the game and after a grass is clicked. I learned how to dynamically spawn mobs in random positions by following this YouTube tutorial on spawning Pokemon, and it was quite easy to adapt to my specific use case. In addition, I needed a way to keep score each time a grass or obstacle was clicked. I ended up making heavy use of Godot signals for this use case, which basically allow you to attach an event listener to a node. Each time a grass was clicked, it would emit a signal which would then be handled by the level scene to increment the score. I also ended up using signals to trigger the end of the game when the game timer is exhausted, and using that to move the player to the score screen. Learning how to use built-in signals and creating custom signals, especially in code, was super valuable, and I'm pretty confident I'll be using these heavily in future games as well. While I myself was very proud of my own creation, even at this point, I think game development recruiters would probably block me from ever entering the industry if I had this sitting at the very top of my resume in its current state. Thus, I decided to put actually a lot of effort into making the game more pretty and complete with graphics, music, and some basic story. While humans are a species known for not touching grass, I personally don't find humans very interesting, so I wanted to focus the main character of the game around an animal of some sort. Capybaras have been showing up on my YouTube Shorts feed a lot lately, and given that they are pretty social animals, I found it incredibly hilarious to have the game centered around an anti-social capybara trying to touch grass. Thus, Cappy was born. From here, I pulled out my iPad and started whipping up drawings in Procreate. I've had this device for years, and I have not once done something productive with it, so I'm sure it was very appreciative of me using it to create assets for a game about touching grass. I didn't have one of those tablet drawing gloves, and I kept scraping my palm against the screen and accidentally drawing things, so I ended up drawing all of these with a winter glove on, and my hand got super sweaty. I have since invested in one of those drawing condoms, which has made my life a lot easier and a lot less sweaty. Anyways, I started cooking up some assets and started substituting the prototypes in my game, and things were looking good. I also put some time into animating Cappy subtly on the title screen, which made the game look a lot better right off the bat. It was also the first time I have ever actually used math in my programs, I think. To get the capybara to move cyclically in a bobbing motion, I had to apply a cosine function to its vertical position and modify the amplitude to a reasonable range. My 6th grade math teacher must be so proud of me for finally using trig to animate antisocial capybaras. Adding the sprites in was also super rewarding and really started to immediately add more personality into the game, despite my drawings being moderately prettier than the prototypes. In addition, to give more context behind the character, I inserted a dialogue scene between the title screen and the gameplay to introduce Cappy and his mission. I was hoping Godot would have some out-of-the-box tooling for creating dialogue boxes like this, but it turns out all the state and transitions need to be done by the game developer. Thankfully, there are many tutorials for this online, and I was able to adapt them to my use case pretty easily without much effort. Finally, I wanted to bring some more life to the score screen. To do this, I decided to add a small janky but cute animation of Cappy rubbing grass very aggressively. I used Godot's animation player to do this and attached a very simple 2-frame sprite sheet to animate Cappy rubbing his arm up and down on the grass. I sped it up to make it more silly, and this is the end result. I was pretty satisfied with the art at this point, but the game still felt a bit lifeless since there was no sound. I wanted to give a chill but cute vibe to the game given the art style, so I geared most of the sound design to that theme. The first thing I wanted to add was background music. Once upon a time, I was super into making music in FL Studio, and I produced a very mediocre track called One Step Outside around 3 years ago. I added this in as a singleton audio stream to the game, and it magically seemed to fit perfectly. From there, I just needed to worry about sound effects. I ended up finding a website called Pixabay, which has a bunch of royalty-free game sound effects to choose from. I found a couple of sound effects I liked there for touching grass and touching obstacles, and added those in. In addition, I plugged in some sound for the buttons, and I was pretty much done. Adding sound effects was surprisingly straightforward, given that audio streams are just nodes that can be manipulated programmatically. Now that we've created this masterpiece, it's time for us to engage in some reflection. One of the biggest things I took away from this is that Godot is actually pretty easy to work with. Despite not having worked with a game engine my entire life, it was super easy to find resources for common use cases on both YouTube and Godot forums. One interesting thing to note though is that a lot of the resources I found were for Godot 3, which is LTS currently. I built Touching Grass in Godot 4, which meant I had to adapt a lot of the resources I found to match Godot 4's flavor of GDScript. This wasn't really a huge deal, and it's mostly the same, and I imagine in the near future, as Godot 4 gets more widely adopted and Godot 3 makes its way out, more resources will be available for this newer version. Another takeaway is that building games is super tedious and takes a long time. Hand drawing each sprite was a lot of work, especially since I'm a really bad artist. However, it's super rewarding to see everything come together in the end, and makes everything totally worth it. The last thing I will mention is that even while making this small game, I almost burned myself out by working on one specific part for too long. For example, I was initially going to program the entire game from start to finish and then add all the assets and sound effect files at the very end. But I was coding too much and watched too many tutorials, and I started to not have fun anymore. What really helped with this was staggering work. So instead of coding for 6 hours straight, I would code a bit, then work on some art assets, and then start picking out sound effects and music. This helped me have more fun consistently since each context switch was refreshing. And the technical work was a break for my artist brain, and the artistic work was a break for my technical brain. Overall, I'm super happy I did this, and I'm proud of the result despite how it looks. If you want to take a peek at the source code, I've provided the GitHub link in the description, and if you want to play the game in your browser, I have also left an itch.io link where you can play it online. Note though that it takes a long time to load on Chrome on macOS for some reason, but it does work eventually. Finally, I want to give a huge thanks to Pirate Software for giving me the motivation to actually do this. It randomly popped up on my YouTube shorts one day, and I can't believe that was the exact motivation I needed to start my game dev journey. I will definitely be making more games in the near future with more complicated mechanics, concepts, and art. If you want to join me in this journey, please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and go make games.